The world is full of a variety of different people from a variety of different backgrounds, cultures, and countries. Each one of those people is going to sound different to our American ears. We typically think of it as an accent. The most common accent most Americans recognize is the English or British accent of our neighbors across the pond. But there are a variety of accents within the U.S. too. We just don't notice them as accents. Sure, they might sound a little different or say things differently, but it's not really an accent, it's a dialect. To find out more about dialects and their uses within the world of theater, I sat down with Dan Matisa, assistant professor of theater at ESU and someone who has coached or performed over 20 dialects in his time as a professional actor and dialect coach. I sat down with Dan in between classes to discuss the subject in more detail. Dan's knowledge of the subject resulted in some long-winded answers, so I've done my best to edit it to fit the time I'm allotted.
Okay, so a dialect, well, there's different definitions, but for actor purposes, American actor purposes, and by that I guess I mean if you're doing a role where the characters speak English but have some sort of regional or international dialect, meaning they have an accent, that the actor has to have the skills to layer that on to the way they speak, that would be considered a dialect.
So
Speaking in an accent. I should have just said that. Why can't I just say it simply?
I don't know. But is there a difference between a dialect and an accent? Or like how do they differ? Or
Not
they just
really.
Okay.
I mean, a dialect is actually, I guess when you get down to it, it's a more confusing way to say it, because you can also talk about dialects linguistically speaking. Like, for example, if we were to go to China, okay, there are many, many different dialects within the languages that are spoken in China. It doesn't necessarily mean accent. It means how do you say, a way of saying something. That can be a dialect. You see what I mean?
Okay.
So dialects also incorporates not only the different substitutions, okay, that a person would make, whether it's in the consonants or in the vowels, in the diphthongs, in the special pronunciations, but it also incorporates, well, the way you say that here is this. For example, part of, my wife is from Arkansas, so part of her, she's not heavily accented. I wouldn't say she has a strong Southern accent, but there are aspects of the Arkansas dialect that come through, such as she will say, do you want me to fix dinner? Okay, now in New York, where I'm from, in New Jersey, where I'm from, to fix something, it means to repair it. Okay, it doesn't mean to make food. Okay? She'll also say, you have to put it up, put that up. Okay, that means put it away. It doesn't mean put it on a high shelf, which is the way you put it. Up as the opposite of down. Put it up means put it away, put it back in the cabinet or back in the drawer, or put the food back in the fridge. Let's put it up. So those are aspects of dialect that don't necessarily have to do with accent. So that's part of the difference.
So a dialect is more of how they say things, while an accent is more of that region. Then?
Well, an accent would be more about the specific way that you use the elements of the organs of your vocal tract, your lips, your teeth, your tongue, your soft palate, your jaw, all of the ways that you make sound, the ways that you transfer, that sound gets transferred, let's say, from your vocal folds, which is where sound comes from, through your skull and out into the world. The different ways that you form those sounds, that's accent.
Okay.
See what I mean? That the different ways you make the vowel or make the consonant, you're still making the same words happen and still having the same meaning most of the time behind them. But that would be accent. If you're saying something differently, like the examples I gave from my wife, fix it or put it up, those would be, I would consider that more of, okay, that's how that's said in that dialect.
Okay.
Okay. But for active purposes, dialect and accent pretty much mean the same thing.
Okay,
Linguistically speaking, those differences I pointed out
so
would be the differences. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Why is it important for an actor and actress to be able to do dialects then?
Well, it makes them more castable, I think. It certainly makes them more virtuosic, which means that's a fancy way of saying that they're more castable in different things. They're able to do more different kinds of roles, and also it's just fun. There's a great deal of fun to be had with dialects.
How difficult would you say is it to learn a dialect?
It depends on the dialect, and it depends on sort of the natural skill of the person. So, and of the person teaching you the dialect. Someone might have a great aptitude for, say, standard British, but when they have to turn that corner and do Cockney, or Scottish, or another dialect, or Irish, or Northern Irish, or another dialect from the UK, even though it's from the same part of the world, essentially, they might have a big problem with it because of either preconceived notions of what the dialect is supposed to sound like, or just difficulty wrapping your brain around, wait a minute, when I say this sound, they say it like this. Practice is the most important thing in a dialect, and learning any dialect and getting comfortability with the dialect. So it's twofold. Difficulty with dialects has to do with how difficult the dialect is to the person having to learn it, and just the skill that the person is coming in with.
All right, cool. So would you say there's an easiest or hardest dialect to learn?
American actors tend to have a little bit more ease with American dialects, like American Southern or Deep South, and there are so many dialects within those. West Texas sounds utterly different from Kentucky, which sounds different from Mississippi, which sounds different from, Deep South is a whole different ball game. You're in the bayou or in sort of Louisiana or Georgia, and that sort of what can sometimes be called the plantation South has totally other concerns. It's still all the South.
Mm-hmm.
So there are sort of general rules, general parts of the recipe, which we start from, and then we listen to native speakers from other places. But generally speaking, American actors don't have too much of a tough time with the Southern dialect, which what can be called American Southern, because they've heard it throughout their life. They may have a relative or a friend or heard it on television, or they've just heard it more in their life. New York, aspects of New York dialect, that's a very easy one for me to slip into, and I can just slip into it without thinking about it because I grew up there. I grew up in Jersey, so it's very, very easy for me. So American ones are more typically easier for American actors. If you've only been in Kansas and only talked to people from Kansas and have only watched TV shows from a young age where people are basically speaking general American, you're probably going to have a tougher time when a harder dialect is introduced to you because you've been exposed to it less. That makes total sense, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Makes perfect sense.
So it's definitely a practice thing.
Oh, you have to practice. And you not only have to practice with your script, you've got to practice off script.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. Is there anything else you'd like to say about dialects or the process?
I would, I guess for any actors listening who are here at ESU and who are listening to your podcast, I would encourage them the next time that the dialect course comes around, it can only help you to take it, just like taking a dance class or taking a movement class or voice and diction or stage combat classes or anything else in your career. Taking a dialects course and at least being introduced to how to approach dialects is only going to help you in the business after this. And then for people who aren't actors, but who are interested in maybe exploring this sort of just as a fun thing or a hobby, I think it's a great skill to be able to listen to people, because part of what we work on is developing the ear and developing, when I say the ear, I don't mean the physical ear. I mean sort of your mental ear, the ability to truly listen to people and try to pick up on their accent and where they might be from, and exploring, culturally what that means. So it's almost like a sociology course in a way.
All right, well, thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dusty.
Learning and doing a dialect is a lot more complicated than I thought it was. My talk with Dan made that very clear with his mention of having to listen to that dialect, practice it, and yet still be clear without worrying too much about authenticity. Dialect of the characters is what helps to sell the setting of a play and the characters themselves, which makes the ability to do a dialect an important skill for actors everywhere.